Roberts.
How many claims for compensation by Australian military veterans were rejected by DVA in the last 12 months, the last 5 years and the last 10 years, and what are the percentages?
Senator Craig Orme, Deputy President. We'd have to take that question in the detail on notice, but I highlighted to you earlier the number of decisions that were taken. Primary decisions in 2015-16 were 44,588.
Yep.
In 2014-15, it was 48,711. So in that order of 50,000 decisions a year, DVA will make in the primary decisions for establishing initial liability. On top of that, that we discussed previously, the Secretary mentioned, is the non-liability health care. So we now have two tracks. The key element is that where liability is established, we provide treatment once the liability is determined. And the second part of that phase is then determining the level of impairment and, if you like, compensation. But in the non-liability healthcare, we have people immediately into treatment upon just calling the department and saying they have one of those 5 conditions mentioned previously. So that's our non-liability healthcare, where we separate the requirement for establishing liability and immediately get the veteran into treatment.
Yes, I've talked with the Department Secretary and John Harris about that and met with the Minister during the break, and we're going to do something to help publicise that tomorrow or the next day.
Senator, if I could just say one thing about the question you've asked, though, and we certainly can take it on notice, but in terms of our systems, you mentioned going back 5, 10 years. I'm not sure our system's going to be good enough to give you what you want, but we'll take it on notice and see what's available.
Thank you. How many of these rejections, this will be on notice too, how many of these rejections have subsequently ended up being dragged through court?
Senator, that's an interesting characterisation, and I understand where you're coming from. The decision to reject a claim would be because the delegate doesn't have sufficient evidence in front of them to support the contention that's being made. So at that point, under the beneficial legislation, we have our delegates look around to try to find a way to say, do we have enough information to support the contention? If there's not sufficient information in front of the delegate to support a decision that says, yes, we accept liability, the claim is rejected. The veteran then has the opportunity to appeal that decision through the Veterans Review Board or the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. And that goes back to those decisions I mentioned, that the number of decisions in year 15-16 that went to appeal was 5,543 of the 44,588, or 12%, 12.4%.
Are there court cases involving veterans over these matters?
Senator, the first one, the levels of appeal are an internal review within the department, but the principal ones are a review by the Veterans Review Board. The Veterans Review Board is a board that's been established for the purpose of resolving issues with veterans' claims, designed for the veterans, not as a legal process. Recently, they've introduced alternate dispute resolution in the last 18 months, and we've found that to be very successful, where the members of the Veterans Review Board sit down and conference with advocates and clients and talk through issues, identify areas of why a decision may not be supported, what further evidence might be required. And in that process, we've identified, and the Veterans Review Board have identified, that they're able to engage in a dialogue which brings out the requirement for the information and allows the advocate or the veteran to identify that further information.
So I accept that some cases there's need for more or adequate information, but are there claims currently in court?
Well, now I'll step to Ms Spears to then go through the next level, which is appeal to the AAT.
I've got the court figures and I've got the Administrative Appeal Tribunal figures. Would you like me to do both?
Yes,
or just
please.
Okay. So the Administrative Appeals Tribunal is the next merits review stage that people can undertake. And in the 15-16 financial year, the AAT, as I'll use the shorthand word for it, there were 195 VA applications made, 155 Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act appeals made, and 97 Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act claims made in that period. I can do half year to date for the current period as well, which is which was for the VEA 89, for the SRCA, Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act 68, and for MERCA 63. So the numbers are quite small compared to the ones that Mr Orme started with. We then have a number of matters that do go on to the court process, and that goes to the court process on a point of law only. So it's not a merits.
On a point of?
It's a point of law. Okay. So regardless of the individual facts of the case, the merits of the case, which is the last level of merit review is the AAT, it could go to the court system on a point of law that, in essence, the tribunal misapplied the law. That's what really the test is about. So we have, in the 2015-2016 financial year, 2 cases that went to the Federal Circuit Court, 4 cases that went to the Federal Court, 3 to the full Federal Court, and 1 to the High Court, so a total of 10. And in the half year to date, so 31st of December 2016, we had a total of 4 cases to that court, to the court structure, 3 to the Federal Court and 1 to the full Federal Court. I can give you outcomes as well if you wish.
Could I just ask who was the plaintiff in the High Court case?
Certainly. The High Court case in the particular matter in 2015-2016 was actually the department, the Repatriation Commission, Military Rehabilitation.
It's just I thought it would be someone who could afford to take the decision to the High Court. Well,
in that case, the particular case involved, it was a very significant point of law that not only impacted on
I'm sure it was. It obviously would have had to have been in order to make it to the High Court. But what I'm asking is who is the applicant?
Well, the issue of costs, if I can get there, Senator, because it was such a significant point of law, and it not only impacted on DVA's compensation processing, but it had the potential to impact on Comcare processing and the workers' compensation sort of across the jurisdictions. The department actually agreed to pay the court costs of the individual. So we wore both costs because the important issue here was to actually get the highest court in the land to give us a decisive decision on this particular area of the law.
Okay, thank you. I'm impressed with the figures, or with the fact that you've got them. How long does it take, this might be a very difficult question to answer, how long does it take the average veteran whose claim isn't immediately accepted to get their just compensation?
Senator, that's a very loaded question because the aim of the whole DVA system is to give everybody their lawful entitlements at the earliest opportunity. And as Mr Orme has said, often what's missing when a person has to appeal to a second or third merits review tribunal, it's because the evidence hasn't been there or we've had to gather the evidence. So the aim always is for the department to make the best correct and preferable decision as soon as possible. And in fact, at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the onus is on the department when it is there to actually assist the tribunal to make the correct or preferable. It's not a litigious system in the sense that it's win at all costs. It's all about assisting the tribunal to come to the best decision. And I suppose the other aspect of all of this is when you look at the AAT appeals, the majority of those appeals are lodged by the veteran community, not by the department. And in fact, even the federal court matters, most of those have been appeals lodged by, in essence, in the first instance, by the individual veterans, not by the department.
That's what I would have guessed, and our staff would have guessed as well.
Yeah.
How much money has DVA spent on lawyers and legal action in the last year, and also over the last 10 years?
I can answer the question about the last full financial year for you and half year to date. Over the last 10 years, I'd have to take that on notice,
okay.
Senator. So in terms of your question, if I deal with half year to date, we break this up as we're required to under the Legal Services Direction because we have to report this annually to the Office of the Legal Services Coordination. So external legal costs expenditure half year to date is $3,626,593. Sorry, $3,626,593. $126,000, $593 and apparently 3 cents. I'm not sure about the 3 cents though.
Wonder where it got to.
And the internal legal costs for the same period is $1,173,365. As to the full year cost for the last financial year, if you just give me a moment, the figures are external legal costs, $8,160,959.14 in this case, and for internal legal costs, $2,464,055. And I hasten to say that legal expenditure, you can't attribute that to defending or appearing on cases. It's actually the total cost of the branch, my branch running, and we do some litigation work, but we do a lot of in-house legal advising work. We do privacy and FOI, and we do legislation. We draft legislative instruments in-house. So a lot of that internal cost is the staff that do all of that work.
So some of the drafting is included in that?
For legislative instruments,
yes.
That's correct. As to legislation, the drafting of that is all done externally by the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, so that's not a cost there. And in terms of the external legal costs, Senator, it's I haven't got the breakdown here, but I will often seek an external legal opinion on a particular issue. Yes, there are some of those costs are to do with AAT work and federal court work, but you couldn't actually attribute all of those costs. And as I said, we'll have to take the 10-year data on notice. I haven't got that here.
This question, isn't it true that it took the last survivor of the 1964 sinking of the HMAS Voyager around 40 years to get compensation?
Senator, can I give you a bit of context for that comment?
Sure, yeah.
So Voyager people, their service is this peacetime period of service in the 60s, which is not covered by the Veterans Entitlements Act. It's covered by the precursor to the Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act.
Is that a predecessor?
And it's a Commonwealth. It's called the Commonwealth Employees Workers Compensation Act. It's the 1971 Act. I actually don't have the title of the Act in my head anymore. But the key to this is the 71 Act and the 1930 Act that was before that. While it could allow for the acceptance of psychological conditions, and I think the case that you might be referring to would have been PTSD, it didn't. Those acts excluded lump sum compensation payments. So for an individual that survived Voyager, they actually wouldn't seek compensation, and if that's their only service, in essence, they wouldn't be seeking compensation from Veterans Affairs. They would actually sue their employer, which is Defence. So I think the matter you're referring to would have been a claim against Defence, and it would be a better place to actually ask them about the details.
Okay, thank you. How many current and former members of the Australian military have committed suicide in the last year? Does anyone?
Well, the first thing to be said, Senator, is we won't necessarily know. We know of some suicides, but the reality in the world of Veterans Affairs is that until last year, 4 out of 5 people left the ADF and were unknown to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So for decades, people served in the Defence Forces, left, and unless they'd lodged a claim with DVA, they were unknown to the department. Now, we've fixed that. We fixed that last year. So last year, for the first time, we know about all 5,500 thereabouts that left the ADF, and the same will continue into the future. But in the past, we didn't.
Okay.
So we would know about that subset of veterans which are clients of the department, but we don't have information in relation to those that were not clients of the department once they left the ADF.
Yeah, it's understood in the community that the number of suicides last year is greater than the death toll from combat over the 14-year Afghan conflict. Is that correct?
We'll give the number, Senator.
That figure is not correct.
I'm sorry, Senator. The study that we had done through the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, AIHW, and the results of that were put out, I think, in November?
Yes, November.
November last year. They were preliminary results, and there are going to be final results due towards the middle of this year. That did give updated numbers on suicide, but I think it went to 2013, did it? 2014. So let's provide what we can.
Yes, Senator, we don't have, because of deaths by suicide, or any, particularly deaths by suicide, we actually need a coronial or a finding by a coroner as to the cause of death, and that can take some time. So we don't have data for 2015 or 2016 yet through the causes of death reports that are produced by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So we are, the most up-to-date data that we have is to 2014. So the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has looked at data from those serving on or from 1 January 2001 and deaths by suicide of that cohort up until 2014. They found that there were 292 certified deaths by suicide in that time period. So as I said, deaths that have been confirmed as being by suicide by a coroner. Of those 292 deaths, 84 occurred in those who were serving full-time in the ADF. 66 were amongst those who were in the reserves, and 142 occurred in the ex-serving population.
And Senator, if you look at those results, you see there's also a particular problem cohort, which is in the 18 to 24-year-old males, which is already a significantly at-risk cohort in the Australian community, but the risk is double if you're a former serving ADF member. So we're really drilling down to understand what that data is telling us and what we need to change in a way in which young folk that come into the ADF intending to serve, but for whatever reason leaving the ADF quite early, is obviously a real problem area. It's a focus for us. So we're working with Defence in relation to our transition processes generally, but we are also looking very particularly at that cohort. And we've also asked the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare to try and obtain as much further data as we can about that cohort. What portion of them, for example, were medical discharges? What portion of those were clients of the Department of Veterans Affairs? So we have those results as well when the final report comes out.
So,
Senator,
Chair, if I could just make a comment that
May I just say, Senator Roberts, everybody here, the Defence Organisation, the Department of Veterans Affairs, we all know that one death by suicide in the veteran community for a serving member of the ADF is one too many. A lot of the discussions that have been had here tonight in a very constructive way are about endeavours that are being made between Defence and between Veterans Affairs to address those very significant concerns. There is still more to do, I acknowledge that, but in recent times we have made significant endeavours to make progress in that regard. I appreciate the engagement and the attention of the committee to these issues. I take it very, very seriously. And if we can assist members in any way with the work that they are doing, then we'll continue to do so. We've made submissions, obviously, from Defence, and I'm here tonight representing the Minister for Veterans Affairs, but from Defence to your inquiries, or the inquiries of the References Committee. And if there is more information that we can provide that will assist you in your thinking around this, then we are, of course, very willing to do that.
Thank you. And Chair, if I could just, I just want to comment out of respect. I won't ask any more questions. Could I just put them on notice, please? And could I also make the comment that I very much appreciated the Secretary when I approached him, taking me into his confidence and introducing me to the Minister, and we'll address the issue that we've raised. And I also want to make a comment that I appreciate that you've been frank about saying in the past things weren't done to a standard that you're happy with, but things appear to be changing. So, and I realise that can't be done overnight. So I'm encouraged. Thank you very much.